Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Coffee with Mildred. I am Maria Erickson, and I am here tonight with my dad, Jim Wiinanen. The Coffee with Mildred series is to be able to capture as many stories as I can in Cook County and all parts of it. So suggestions for who I should interview next are always welcome. Tonight is Wayne. Tonight is my dad. Next week is Wayne. Then we're doing Jesse James up in Grand Portage, and hopefully Evelyn Larson at the end of the month is this lineup for this month. I have really enjoyed doing this. We were only supposed to do it for a month during our membership drive, but clearly there are way too many people that I need to talk to, so I couldn't stop doing it. So tonight, my dad was not born here, but he has lived most of his life in Cook County. And but we're gonna start with his growing up on the range. In Cherry is where you were born. You know, sometimes you just doubt yourself when you're on the camera all of a sudden. So if any of you know my dad, he said that he had a cheat sheet for tonight. And I expected scratch paper from his pocket with a Sharpie, notes written out a little bit, maybe a flow chart, because he's that kind of guy. No, I got a 6-page, of notes and stories and whatnot, which I will treasure that. But it made me giggle. So we are well prepared for this evening. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my dad. Say hi, Dad.
Hi, Maria. Good to see you again.
Yes, good to see you. It's been a while. So Dad, how did your family come to be on the Iron Range?
Before I get to that.
Okay, yes.
Kind of the point tonight, I think, is a little bit of background where I came from, and then tie it into how I got to Cook County, which is a story in itself. But like Maria said, I grew up in the little hamlet of Cherry, and up until a few years ago, I would have to explain where that is. But more recently, most people in Cook County know, because Cook County sports teams have been playing the Cherry sports teams for a number of years now. So people have been traveling back and forth to the little hamlet between Eveleth and Hibbing. So growing up, I guess my growing up years would be the early 50s or thereabouts. And I consider myself being in the middle of a pack of 20 plus, more than maybe 25 cousins, the cousins ranging in age from diapers to high school. And kind of being in the middle, you had a lot of playmates, because in Cherry at that time, the aunts and uncles didn't travel very far. So a lot of family and cousins lived probably within about 10 miles of our home. So that kind of sets the stage. And back then, there were two predominant occupations. The aunts and uncles either were farming, dairy farming, or worked in the mines. So back then, Cherry had its own little sports conference, the St. Louis County Conference, and those communities included places like Orr and Cook, Cotton, Elbrook, Alango, Clover Valley, and Embarrass, and some of those don't even have schools anymore because of consolidation and the like. So growing up in that community, it's you, at least for the boys, it was sort of an unwritten rule that as soon as you were able to help, you started helping on the farm. And if not your own farm or your parents' farm, you helped the aunts and uncles. And my parents, when they got married, were able to buy a little chunk of land within a mile of my grandparents. And they started farming because that was the thing to do. But after I came along, there were some changes. But kind of back to helping out on the dairy farm, I don't know, I might have been in third grade, fourth grade. You would eventually be sent over to, in my case, it was Uncle Eddie's farm, and you were kind of shown the ropes. And the first experience driving a tractor is sitting on the tractor seat with my grandpa behind, making sure pretending like I was driving, I guess. But that's where it started for just about all the cousins. You went to the aunts and uncles' farm and helped out with haying primarily.
The boys got to hay.
The boys got to do that. The girls, well, back then it was doing the girls' things.
Yeah, I remember you telling me you wanted to send me to go do hay with, some of the uncles that were still doing hay, and you're like, but all you get to do is make sandwiches, which is not what I wanted to do.
Right. Well, a little bit about my grandparents, and unfortunately, I only know on my dad's side. On my mom's side, her parents died quite young. I think she was still in high school at that point. But my grandpa was born in Finland and lived close to the Russian border, and it was early 1900s. It was not a very good place to be. Life was hard, and he decided to come to America and start anew at 17 years old.
Did he change? What was his? Did he have to change his name at all?
No, he didn't have to change. But back in Finland, basically the W in Wiinanen was a V, so it was Wiinanen on that side of the family. On Grandma's side, that's a little more extensive story. My great grandpa got married in the late 1800s, I think, in Finland, and decided to come to America. There was some relative in America already that basically the stories coming were that you could go to this new country and shovel gold right out of the ground and become wealthy. But he got married, came over, and then in the mail the next year got a letter saying that he had a daughter. And the daughter and her mom were living in a bedroom of another relative, waiting for great grandpa to get enough money to buy passage on a ship and get them over. So it took 6 years to earn that money. He was living in Cloquet, a little hamlet called Cedar Valley, northwest of Duluth, and scratching out a living there. He actually did go to California to try his luck at gold mining, and that didn't work, and came back. And 6 years later, his wife and the daughter came over on a ship, took the rail from New York to Duluth, and from Duluth to the end of the line in Cloquet, and that's where he met his daughter for the first time and saw his wife after 6 years.
And what was his name?
Let's see. I think it was Alex.
Okay.
Juula.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so they started first by trying to scratch out a living in Cloquet, and that was very hard in the late 1800s, and eventually moved up to the Cedar Valley area and bought a little piece of land. And they, lo and behold, within a year, another daughter was born, and that was Nellie Juula, who was my grandmother. So my grandpa John came over, and he lived in Kinney, and I think worked in the mines right off the bat. Kinney, nowadays you'd call it a suburb of Eveleth, small hamlet. So somewhere in there, Grandpa John and went to Cedar Valley and met this young lady, and at 20, I think 20 years old, 21 years old, they got married and moved back north to the Cherry area and started a small farm and started the family. I guess I should back up a little bit. Nellie had quite a story that she told me when I was young, that they had to help raise, I think they had 11 kids in the family. So she and her sister Hilma were quite busy helping to raise the kids. But when they got older and the others were able to help, they could go out and get a real job and provide some resources for the family. So Hilma and Nellie went about 20 miles north of Cedar Valley to help in a logging camp as cooks.
Oh my.
And they there was still some tall timber, some big timber left, and in the logging camp, as you can imagine from the old pictures, long, low log buildings, and Grandma and her sister had a small room in the cook shack, the dining hall, and she said that it was cold there. How cold?
How cold was it?
It was so cold that her hair would stick to the frost on the log walls, and she would have to pull her hair off in the morning or put her hand on it to thaw it out.
Jeez.
But that was part of her teenage years. And then with Grandpa John, they moved up to Cherry and were able to get a small plot of land and start farming and raising a family. clearing the land at that time was just all by hand. Horses, if you were lucky, in order to afford to buy a horse, but otherwise it was just all handwork and digging and trying to scratch it out, and you're basically harvesting rocks most of the time. Anyway,
So this is their wedding picture? Is that
this
right?
would be Grandma and let's see if I can get that in there.
Trying to look in the reflection in the mirror. There we go. I think we got it now. Okay.
So they had cows and gardens and the like to make ends meet. Grandpa had odd jobs. Like I said, he did mining first. He did a little bit of logging as well. But after getting settled in Cherry, he actually was a school bus driver for a while, and growing family, lots of kids. They hosted the traveling minister at the house, and eventually he and others in the community started our church, Bethel Lutheran Church in Cherry.
Now, didn't he mostly speak Finnish?
They were Finnish speakers. Grandma spoke English later on. She and I understood each other. But Grandpa was known to be, real friendly in that way, and always willing to help out and give a hand here or there, and invite people over for a meal, and if needed, to stay overnight. Unfortunately, he often did not tell Grandma that he was bringing somebody for dinner or somebody overnight, and then the kids would have to shuffle beds in order to free up a bed for the guest, and so on. So that was kind of part of growing up for my parents.
That's so not Finnish-like of him.
Not real reserved on his part, no.
No.
So it turns out that there was quite a bit of optimism in the late 40s. This was after the war, and things were looking up as far as the economy goes, and so on. And one of my dad's sisters somehow connected with a young man in Mountain Iron, not too far away, and they fell in love and got married, and so that brought the Koskela clan into kind of the orbit of the Wiinanens and so forth. And it wasn't much more than a year or so later, 1946, that this Harold Koskela's sister, Helena, was approached by my dad, and they got married. So there was sort of, when we grew up, it was sort of instant double cousins, I guess is what they would call it. And that made for a pretty close connection. And eventually their home was not more than a quarter mile from the home where I grew up.
It's kind of amazing to me that, your mom and dad ended up getting married, because it was quite a few years ago. We took Grandma and Grandpa Wiinanen on a car ride of their first date, sort of, going to memorable places that they went to. And their first date was pizza. And Grandma told us that he took her out for pizza and then he dropped her off early and then went out with another girl of not so good reputation. Grandma was the good girl, and then he went out with this other girl, but he ended up marrying Grandma. So
Thank goodness.
yes.
But anyway, my mom and dad then bought a little small farm within a half a mile of my grandma and grandpa, and had cows kind of those first couple years before I was born. And then because I don't remember any cows at all, because in that early 50s period, Grandpa and the boys had this idea that we've got quite a few cows and we're getting quite a bit of milk. How about if we take it to town, 14 miles, and peddle the milk? And the way I like to tell the story is that they bottled up 7 cases of milk, left early in the morning to go knock on doors in Evlith, and maybe they got up to Virginia, I don't know, and said they had milk for sale. And at the end of the day, they came back with 5 cases of milk. So it wasn't a real flashy beginning, but they kept at it. And some of my uncles started to help out. Instead of just bottling the milk on the farm, in the middle 50s, then they were able to acquire a larger building, build a larger building, and actually process the milk, not only from their farm, but then also they were collecting it from other farms. And that grew the business. 3 brothers working together, had its ups and downs. Decisions probably weren't made real quick, but they worked at it. And at its peak, if I recall, there were 7 trucks, 7 drivers, probably 12 employees. The 7 trucks each delivered 2 different routes on alternating days. They covered the rural areas plus the areas of Hibbing and Mountain Iron, Chisholm, Gilbert, Evlith, and became known locally then as the Wiinanen Dairy. So I talked a little bit about this growing up and helping on the farm, help with the haying, and as you gain some skills, you got to maybe go out and cut hay, and the real grown-up cousins were able to help out with baling hay too, as they finished high school and so on.
Wasn't there a story about you and some fencing, like a roll of fencing?
Well, those are 2 stories.
Okay.
So to quickly cover this, as a young lad, 7, 8, 9 years old, I really wanted a horse. And it didn't have to be a fancy horse. In fact, across the road, farmer's horse had been put out to pasture and had as sway back as you could ever believe, and that horse would be okay. But but in order to have a horse, you have to have a fence to keep it in. So I spent, I don't know how many days going out with chunks of rusty barbed wire and trying to fix a fence and get it so that it would keep a horse in that was on its last legs anyway, and never did get a horse. Until then I leave home, go to college, and what does my dad do? He starts raising and breeding Arabians, and those were beautiful, beautiful animals. The other fence story you're talking about, that's too embarrassing to tell, except I was trying to, I don't know, play some sort of war story or something in the field, and there was rolled up snow fence in the corner of the field in the summer, and climbed on top and decided to wiggle inside this roll of snow fence. And it's easier to wiggle down into a roll of snow fence than it is to wiggle out. So that didn't pan out. It took a little bit of hollering to get my mother's attention to come and rescue me and tip the fence over. So let's see, I'll jump ahead and then go back to one other story. But as you grow up, you're helping the uncles on the farm. Now with the dairy business being busy, and I'm junior high and wanting to help out or encouraged to help out, I guess would be the better word. You got to wash milk trucks. You got to clean the office, clean the toilets in the office, and that kind of stuff to learn what work is about. So that was one of the jobs at the dairy. I need to back up about growing up. This must have been 5 or 6 years old. Just going to grandma's, my grandma and grandpa's. That was where the sauna was. And so you can imagine with 20-some cousins and 8, 10 families that would go over to grandma's for sauna. It had to be scheduled. On Saturday, you'd start in the morning and families would roll in and roll out and bring goodies to eat and so forth. And as little kids, you went with your family into the sauna and got all cleaned up for the next week, and everything's all well and good. But as you grow up, then you realize, wait a minute, I don't have to go to take a sauna with my parents, of all things. So then you're going with your cousins and the like, and then it gets to a point where you want to go take a sauna by yourself. And so I was pretty young, and this experience is just really burned into my memory. But I was in the sauna and had filled the water bucket in front of me, and I was leaning over to get water out of the bucket, except the sauna stove was right behind me. And in bending over, I got branded. And that was kind of embarrassing to have to go up and get some help with that. But that's what happened when I took a sauna by myself. Okay.
So how did your family end up being connected up here?
Well, I think the story, well, life is good, right? You're growing up, you're learning work skills, you're helping on the farm, helping at the dairy and the like. And one summer, I think my 8th grade, 9th grade, the pastor suggested to all the youth that maybe we should take a canoe trip and take a canoe trip during the summer and try to work it around this haying season or whatever work you might have. And I got it cleared from my parents. Well, yeah, go ahead. You can go on this camping trip. We don't know anything about it, but you're going to be in a canoe or whatever. And so the pastor had pulled a group together, and it wasn't. We went up to Ely. I remember that, and I remember I had read the books. Right, you read the Boy Scout Merit Badge book on canoeing, and promptly I got into the canoe and was reminded by the pastor that that isn't where you sit in the canoe. You sit on the seat over here. And oh, okay. So I reprimanded right off the bat, and off we went. There were probably 15 of us, I guess, all different ages. Paddled through lakes 1, 2, 3, 4, and got into Hudson. And that's where we camped for a few days, and some people fished and some helped with camp chores and the like and swimming and so forth. And then we paddled home, and that was pretty cool. There were trees out there and there was a lot of water compared to the farming area in Cherry. No trees, just a lot of hay fields and cows roaming around. And so that was pretty neat. And then the next summer, I thought I was pretty good, so I convinced my parents that we should go on a canoe trip. And lo and behold, they agreed, and my sisters and I and mom and dad piled in the car, went up, rented the canoes at Lake One, packed all our stuff, and paddled out to Lake Four. And being the second canoe trip experience, we kind of got the whole 9 yards. We had blistering hot sun. It poured buckets into the tent as well as around the tent. It hailed on us, and the wind was so strong we couldn't paddle into the wind, and had to get assistance, shall we say, to get towed over to the portage. So that was a canoe trip, and then I started to go with some of my classmates. Opening weekend of fishing season, we'd only get a 2-night trip in, and then my dad and I, he suggested that we take a trip, and that was a lot of hard work, but again, we went through that same area and went even further. So this was neat stuff. This canoeing is really good. We had gone through these outfitters in Ely. There's a job for me. I would work for an outfitter and be in the canoe country. So my winter of my junior year, I buckled down and wrote an application letter and tried my best typing skills to apply to 8 outfitters in Ely. And this is going to be great. And within a few weeks, I started to get letters back and got 8 nicely written rejection letters. No job. It's going to be farming again, washing milk trucks. I'm a little older now. Maybe I could, since I could lift a case of milk, now I could help the drivers and be an assistant on the route delivering milk door to door. So that was another job opportunity. But then pastor of our church, knowing that I had been on a couple of canoe trips and knowing that I had applied to work for an outfitter in Ely and had gotten rejected by all of them, suggested that I write to this camp out of Grand Marais. Where's Grand Marais? I had no idea where Grand Marais is. And to apply to the camp, you have to write a letter to Minneapolis, to a place called Plymouth Christian Youth Center. Well, okay, I'll give that a try. So I wrote an application letter to the city, thinking I would get a job in the woods. And lo and behold, I got a phone call from the camp director, and the camp director's name was Ham Moose. Imagine that, ham for a name, Ham Moose. And we chatted on the phone. Of course, you know, I'm pretty shy and scared. You know, he asked, "What work have you done?" "Oh, helped on the farm." "Have you been on, do you know about canoeing?" "Yeah, I was in a canoe." And that's probably how it went, because we hung up and I didn't think anything of it, and back to school and get ready for the summer. But then I get a letter in the mail with a contract. This is a contract to work at Wilderness Canoe Base as a swamper. I found out a swamper is an assistant guide. And Mom and Dad asked, "Well, how much does it pay?" And I looked and I looked, and in the literature it didn't say anything about swampers getting paid. It was room and board. Oh, well, we better check this out. So it was Mother's Day during my junior year in high school in May, and up early and bundle into the car, and there's no shortcut back then. It was down to Duluth and up the North Shore, and yep, we got to Grand Marais. It's a little town on Lake Superior. Lake Superior is pretty cool. Then we headed up the Gunflint Trail. We had to look at the maps to find out where that was. And boy, the pavement ended pretty quick, and then it was a gravel road. And that followed that gravel road. Well, we stopped for lunch at the Brule River, had our sandwiches and fruit, and continued on, and there was a sign that said Wilderness Canoe Base at the end of the driveway. So we drove in, and this was in May, and we about a half-mile driveway. We get in, open parking lot area, drive down to the lake. Yeah, the map says that you come down to the lake right here, and the camp is on 2 islands. So we look at the map and get out of the car. There's nobody there. We look around, and yeah, that's island over there. That's part of the camp. Yeah. Well, this must be the place. And then we got back in the car and we left. We spent about as much time as it took for me to tell you that. And then it was 230 some miles back home again.
Was there the bridge between the islands then?
No. Was not.
Okay.
Could not
tell that there was anything there.
Right. So back home, we had been there, seen it, done that. This is where the kid is going to spend his summer, I guess. And lo and behold, when school was out, we packed up. You looked at all these lists of things to bring and not to bring, and all the literature you're supposed to read ahead of time, and so on, and got back in the car and headed for Grand Marais. And up the Gunflint Trail, grab a sandwich at the Brule River, and continued on. And this is kind of the first time away from home. Well, you need to know I did go to camp as a younger kid too. That was at the encouragement of my cousins. It was a little place called Camp Seagull. There were probably 40 or 50 kids in camp. I didn't know anybody except for my older cousins who didn't care really if I was there or not at the time. And supposed to stay there Monday through Friday. By Wednesday, I was so homesick, I called Mom and Dad and they came and got me. That was my camp experience. And now I was going to go to camp for a whole summer. Well, we got in to the Cove area again. Many of you will know, as I describe the area, what it's like, and there's people there. This is early June, and they came up smiling and welcoming me, a total stranger, and my parents. Got the car unloaded. They showed my parents to a guest cabin on the mainland where they were going to stay. And then all your stuff is put on a pontoon boat and you get a ride across to the islands. And the people were so willing and helpful to help you get moved into your cabin. The cabin at that time, many of you will know that they were called two-person cabins, probably 8 foot by 10 foot, and that's where you would spend the summer. And then kind of a quick tour of camp with the folks, and then it was time for supper. Well, yeah, back at the farm, you'd pile into the kitchen, settle down around the table, and pass the food around, and everybody digs in. But we walked in and Ham Moose was there and said, "This is your table." And we sat at a table kind of by ourselves, and it was at the front of the dining hall, and the rest of the staff was out there. And we were served our dinner, and after dinner, Ham introduced me, not only me, to the staff. Ham introduced my family to the staff, and we, at that point too, I realized this is really different. This is special, and I spent my first night in the 2P cabin with Harvey Peterson. He was a guide counselor that summer. Next day we had breakfast. Parents had come over, and then it was time for them to leave. Ham came over to the Cove on the pontoon boat as they put their luggage into the car, and we're saying goodbye. And I was standing pretty close there to my dad and Ham, and my dad turned to Ham and he said, "Make sure you give him enough work to do." Turned out to be 40-some years probably of work. But that was summer one, and started out as a swamper, but then ended up through a little staff shuffle, got a job in the trail shack. And trail shack took care of food and equipment for all the trips. And this one had a wage attached to it. My goodness, $20 a week.
Woohoo!
Yeah. So that finished out that summer. I was assistant quartermaster, and then it was all well and good. Go back to school. play sports, think about maybe I could go back to camp again after my senior year. And that seemed like a good idea. I sent the letter saying I'd be interested in doing that same job again. And then got a letter in the mail. And that letter said your position would be quartermaster, not assistant quartermaster. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, so then you flip through the literature and you look, who's the assistant quartermaster? Well, lo and behold, the assistant quartermaster my second summer was actually the quartermaster my first summer. How did that happen? Well, that's a whole nother story. We won't get into that.
So how long when you started or had Wilderness been operating?
Wilderness Canoe Base first summer was 1957, and my first summer was 1965.
Okay.
And came back in 66, and then I was off to Camp Vermilion for the summers during college as a guide counselor on the west side of the forest. And kind of quickly here, I went to summer school, got my degree, a teaching degree in the sciences. The summer of 71, needed a summer job, and at UMD I was could see that they were hiring for historians at Grand Portage National Monument. Well, that sounded like an interesting job. Had been in the canoe country for a while, and now it was a chance to be at the hub, the national monument that represented the hub of the fur trade of North America in the late 1600s and 1700s. And I signed up for an interview slot and went in, and the fellow interviewing me looked at my transcript and said, "You don't have a history class." No, I don't. He said, "Well, I'm sorry." So I stepped outside, and another person came in to interview, and when they were done, I knocked on the door and said, "Can I talk to you some more?" And chat a little more about, the history that I knew of the canoe country. I had to leave again because there was another person interviewing, and there was a little break, and I knocked again and chatted with Arnie Long, was his name. And he said, "You don't have a history class." Okay, so enough of that. And a couple weeks later, I got a phone call from Arnie Long. He said, "Even though you don't have a background in history, you can be a summer ranger, and we'll call you a ranger historian." And that was a very indelible summer as well. Wonderful experience at the Grand Portage Reservation. Super people, great experiences with archaeology and what was going on there. So that was 71, and then I was a teacher. And summer of 72, after being a teacher, I, maybe go back to the canoe country, and applied to work at Wilderness Canoe Base for 72. Got a job there, waterfront coordinator. That was pretty neat. And end of 72, I didn't have a job. I didn't have a teaching job. What am I going to do? I went back home, went to visit Grandma, and my grandpa had passed away then. She was helping Uncle Eddie. And she said, what do you think about taking over the farm? Uncle Eddie's farm? 30 some cows, growing crops. But I don't know that much. I don't know anything about farming, I said to my grandma. And she was in her rocking chair. And she looked at me and she said, Jim, the land will teach you. The land will teach you. And I sat and I thought. What I ended up doing, though, was getting a milk route at the Wiinanen Dairy. I could drive milk truck, get up at 3:30, 4 in the morning, get the truck loaded, and in theory be done by 2 in the afternoon delivering milk. Got trained in on that, but that's a whole nother story. I did get a call during that month from one of my college professors saying, there's a place in Isabella that's starting an environmental education program. You're the only student I had in college that kept asking about camp programs and outdoor programs and stuff. And so he put me in touch with this place, and I went up to Isabella and interviewed at the Environmental Learning Center. And I think maybe to my parents' disappointment, but they never let on that I didn't stick with the business. They encouraged me to follow a dream of outdoor education, and went to Isabella and worked there for a couple years. Great adventures there, but that's another story. And when it became apparent that that would end, then I was encouraged to apply at the Minnesota Outward Bound School. And it was, that was in Ely on the Quishby River. And that experience, again, was indelible. I could not believe what impressions wilderness experiences would have on people. And there I had the opportunity to help with that program, and stayed on through the winter. Got married at that time, and was also in conversation again with the director at Wilderness Canoe Base, Jim Cherry, who said he wanted to do a full year-round program, winter programming, and wanted an assistant director for the summer. And that seemed like a good move to make. And in November of 1975, loaded up the stuff in the pickup truck, and Carol and I moved to the end of the Gunflint Trail. And at the time, this is only supposed to be a kind of a year or two thing, and then hand it off and do something else. But head off for other challenges. But over what amounted to 29 years, the environment up there changed. There was always new people, new program ideas, new challenges that way. And as long as they were willing to keep me around, I'll help out however I can. And that's kind of it in a nutshell, daughter of mine, on how I left from a farm in Cherry to the end of the Gunflint Trail.
Pretty good. I see at least 10 more interviews going. Like I know that you had a lot of mentors from your time in Grand Portage, and relationships that you made just in that short period of time that even as I was growing up, were still connections that you connected with, and we'll talk more about those at another time. As well as all the relationships at the end of the Gunflint Trail with sort of legends up there. Blankenbergs, I hope to talk
wonderful.
about them with you. And too, when I was little, there was still some people living in the Boundary Waters, in cabins out there, and we'll talk about those next time as well. Are you writing this down for your to-do list?
We'll remember.
But one last memory. You shared a story with me today that I had never heard before about how you learned to be frugal, and that'll be our last little wind up for the night.
Yeah, frugal and learning the world of high finance. This would be my grandma and grandpa, and I think I piled in with a cousin or two of mine in the car, and we were going to go to the store. I think it was a 1952 Chevy Styleliner. I looked it up trying to find something that looked like that car. Well, Grandpa's driving, Grandma's in the front seat, me and my cousin's in the back seat, and head down the road. Well, over a number of trips with Grandpa, I realized that he would accelerate up to about 40-45 miles an hour and then take his foot off the gas and coast until it got down to 20 miles an hour. Then he would accelerate up again to about 45 miles an hour and then let it coast. So he figured he was saving money that way. But then we were going to get a treat. So Grandma turns around and hands me a nickel and gives my cousin a dime.
No, hands you a dime and gives your cousin a nickel.
That's right. Hands me a dime, gives my cousin a nickel, and I started crying because my cousin's money was bigger than my money. And I couldn't understand that I had twice as much money as he did. Enough of that. High finance.
Hopefully that's not where I get my banking skills from for working at the Grammar State Bank. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Like I said, there will be many more interviews with my dad and different areas in the county to cover, and people and legends and whatnot that can't share their own stories with us, but we will do our best to honor them this way. So thank you so much for joining us. If you like Coffee with Mildred, please feel free. It's not our membership drive anymore, but you can always become a member at cookcountyhistory.org, or you can just place a one-time donation. We have some huge projects coming up this year with archival storage. We have over 28,000 or over 25,000 items that we store for Cook County that are used at all of the historical sites in that area, or for people to come and do research. So we always need your help and support. Thanks for joining me tonight, and we will see you again next Tuesday. We're back with Wayne Anderson. I'm thinking we're going to start with 8th grade and move on from there for Wayne. So we'll see you next week. Have a good week.
You didn't